enough. Is it long enough?
Welcome, Husker Nation, to Postgame Spread, presented by Hurrdat Sports.
His second interception on the season. Multiple flags come down on the return.
Breaking down the highs and lows of what we just witnessed from our beloved Cornhuskers.
Touchdown, Nebraska.
It's time to let it all out. Join the conversation on YouTube or Twitter at Hurrdat Sports, or live in person at the Hurrdat Sports Bar and Grill.
I'm done. Let's go.
It's time for Post-Game Spread.
Spread it on.
Welcome to the Post-Game Spread presented by Hurrdat Sports. I'm Rhule. That is Drake Keeler. And we're coming to you live from the Hurrdat Sports Bar and Grill, where sadness overflows, just like the game day specials on beer as Nebraska falls to Colorado 36-14. You can follow along with us on the Hurrdat Sports Twitter and YouTube pages, and we would love to hear your comments on either of those. Drake, there's there's a lot to get into here.
Yes.
And I think we have to start with what is happening with the Jeff Sims situation.
Yeah, I mean, last week he had the 3 turnovers. It looked bad, but not quite as bad as dropping 2 snaps. And those are 2 turnovers you can't have. He had another pick, and those were why Nebraska got behind at halftime, and a big part of why they lost this game. Colorado might have come up with it anyway, but the defense was really, really good in the first half, and that was just crushing.
Yeah, and you can make an argument that the fumble that gets credited to Gabe Ervin on the handoff was also Jeff Sims' fault, not getting the ball into his stomach. So you're looking at 3 minimum, maybe 4 turnovers from Jeff Sims, which is too many damn turnovers, Drake. This is a team where Anthony Grant got 0 touches this week, right? Because of what we saw at the end of the game against Minnesota. I don't know how you keep trotting Jeff Sims out there. Now, obviously, he got injured at the end, so that's an X factor there that we can't really figure for in terms of what happens next. But it seems like they were intent on continuing to play him despite the seemingly countless turnovers that he accounts for. At this point, he's got a 3-to-1 turnover to touchdown ratio, which is really bad.
Really bad. Yeah.
That's not what you want there. So I guess as you're watching this game, and listen, we saw a little bit of Heinrich Harburg. We saw a little bit of Chuba Purdy. Neither one of them looked like they lit the world on fire, although Harburg ran the ball pretty well.
Yeah. He did yeah.
As you're kind of watching this game, how are you processing the whole Jeff Sims elephant in the room thing? Because yes, he's probably the most talented quarterback on the roster. I get that. He's also probably the most turnover prone person I've ever seen in my life.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think, like you said, I think he's probably, I'd like to believe he's probably a good bit better than the other 2 backups. But when you're not only turning the ball over, but turning it over where you're not catching the snaps, you can't have that, right? That's not right. If he was pushing the ball down the field, getting a few balls picked off, that might be different. Mm-hmm. And I was surprised they didn't pull him out. And I guess that's, probably because they believe he's a lot better than the other 2. But it's hard, when you make the simple mistakes like that. I feel like you got to take a guy out at least for a drive.
Yeah, it seemed like it has gotten in his head, right? Because the interceptions, you can last week you can kind of say, hey, okay, he didn't see the guy, or he threw the ball late, or he was making the right read but the wrong execution on the throw. There's a lot of reasons that interceptions happen, right? I don't necessarily believe those excuses, but there's a lot of reasons interceptions can happen. When you're just not catching the ball, whether it's under center, whether it's from shotgun snaps, whatever it is, at a certain point, it's in his head. Right. And if he can't get out of his own head, I'm not saying it's the yips or anything, but I don't know how far away from that we really are, because it seems like every time he touches the ball, everyone is terrified he's going to turn it over. And if we're feeling that way, what does the team feel like, right? I mean, that's the other thing we have to kind of talk about here is what is the rest of the team getting the message from the coaches where they're continuing to put Jeff Sims out there and it's actively hurting the team.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what you do at this point. It was really bad. I mean, even like after the turnovers, that last drive of the half, he had to just threw it up there. It looked bad. It looked like he was just not. Something wasn't working. Beyond the football talent wise, like you said, the mental side, right? And I mean, I don't know what you do from here because your starting quarterback has been really bad, and it depends if you want to give Harburg some time, if you want to give Purdy some time, maybe you have to at least look at it.
Well, you either have to look at that, or I think you have to look at running an offense that is almost strictly a QB run offense, right? Because I think the one place that he really excels, not just in terms of running the ball, as we saw the 57-yard touchdown run in the second half, that made it 13-7, by the way. This game was 13-7 at one point, in case we forget, as we look at the final score of 36-14. But if you want to emphasize not just his QB run game, but I think for the most part, and he made one really bad decision on a zone read today, for the most part, he makes really good decisions on when to keep the ball and when to give it to the back. And so I don't know if you go with Jeff Sims, you almost have to emphasize exclusively that part of the game and maybe take occasional deep shots. You can't really ask him to read the field or read a defense. You can't really ask him to go through progressions. You can't get kind of goofy with those motions that it seemed to kind of screen him, I think is what was happening on those snaps is the in-motion guy. They were trying to time it real close. One of them hit off Lindemeyer as he was coming through, although he recovered that one. So I don't know if that's kind of screening him and messing with his vision or whatever, but you almost have to scrap a lot of those things if you're going to stick with Jeff Sims, and maybe that's still worth it, but you can't be afraid of running him 20, 25 times a game because that's about the only thing he's bringing to the table at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I anticipate right now, that Sims is probably going to start all 12 games barring injury. I think he's that good of a runner, and I don't know if Harburg or Purdy are as good of throwers to, unseat him. But you got to figure that out, right? You can't have this happening or else you're going to have to bench him at some point. So they got to figure out a way that happened. I mean, like you said, one of the fumbles obviously hit off Lindemeyer. The other one, the in motion guy was right by him and it didn't hit off him, but you could see how that has an impact.
Yeah.
So you've got to get that under control. I mean, you can't have that happen with someone who is as talented as Sims, even if you're talking just as a runner.
Yeah. And so the other thing that we have to look here is it's either the play calling or the quarterback has to change, because that equation with the calls that are currently being made by Satterfield and the quarterback that's currently in there in Sims is not working out to being successful. They have 21 points in 2 weeks. One of them is on that total crap trick play that happened last week. One of them's on a 57-yard run this week, and one of them's with Heinrich Harburg at as the quarterback. So I don't know that you can say this is working the way they've done it.
Right.
And it is a detriment to what has been. And listen, I know you look at the final numbers and you're like, yeah, the defense didn't play that well. Watch the game. They really did.
Yeah.
They kept them in that thing for so damn long when they should have gotten the door slammed on them so quickly with how many mistakes were being made by the offense. I mean, this thing was 13-7 in the second half still. Right. And Nebraska had every opportunity until they just got hammered by mistakes and turnovers. The elephant in the room here is I don't know how you go into that locker room and say to the defense and say to your other offensive players, hey, we believe in holding people accountable and people being responsible for themselves and taking ownership of our mistakes, if you keep trotting Jeff Sims out there. I don't know how you can make that statement and have anyone believe you if you continue to put Jeff Sims out there in these positions where he has not been successful.
Yeah, and I think that has to be a consideration. It can't be he's turned it over 3 times and you just keep setting him back out there. If that happens again, you've got to make that change.
Yeah.
And
I mean, we're
obviously,
talking 6 turnovers in 2 games,
Yeah.
7 if you count
in
the
6 quarters.
the
Yeah.
one to Gabe Ervin, right? And so that's an astronomical number of turnovers, right? In exchange for 2 touchdowns.
Yeah. And like you said, the defense was really good in that first half. They gave up a couple plays late in the first half. 300 of those Colorado yards came after halftime. And it was like, it's hard to
The dam broke on the defense.
get down on them for that, because it was just the offense was so bad, and it was really bad against Minnesota too. You hope that, it was just a good defense on the other end, but it happened again this week where the offense couldn't do anything.
Yeah, it's not just that the offense can't do anything, it's that they're actively putting the defense in bad positions, right?
Yes.
They're starting them off in minus territory where they don't have to go over. I mean, one of the field goals in the first half from Colorado, they started that ball like in the red zone.
Right.
Basically, you can't continually put your defense in those positions. I'm really encouraged by the defense, even though you look at that 36 number, you look at 468 yards of total offense, basically, you say, hey, that's not a great defensive performance. It really was. Like for 3 quarters of that game, it was a really very solid defensive performance, and the dam just broke. They couldn't continue to hold up in the altitude, being on the field for that many plays. I mean, Nebraska ran 63 plays to 77 for Colorado. So that's not a huge disparity, but part of that is because on some of those some of those Colorado scoring drives, they had such short fields to deal with because of those Nebraska turnovers.
Yeah, and I think the special teams wasn't great either. I mean, Colorado started, I think, their first 3 drives at least, their own 35, had some near midfield, and the defense held up, so it was really impressive seeing that. I think, you could argue that Colorado was going to eventually get some points up in the second half, whatever, but the defense largely did what they needed to do. It's just the offense was really hurting them. I mean, like we said, we've been saying it, but
yeah, there's really only so many ways to say it. And, if you look, I think there's going to be the Colorado hype is going to go to a whole other level this week. And you know what, there's a part of me that's really impressed with the job Dion has done, right? Yeah. There's a part of me that is really impressed that they came out, they got the win in week 1. I don't think TCU is very good. I think they probably end up being the 6-6-ish team and falling off pretty dramatically from where they were last year. The defense on TCU is really, really bad. But Nebraska's offense is just as bad as TCU's defense is. So this is, again, sounds like I'm taking away from Colorado here. What Dion has done in 2 games from a team that was probably the worst team in Power 5 football last year is remarkable. All credit there. This game would have been very, very close if Nebraska doesn't just kill themselves with penalties and turnovers.
Yeah, you're right. And, like you said, credit to Colorado.
And maybe they still win. Yeah, but it wouldn't have been 36-14.
Probably, yeah.
It probably would have looked a lot more like last week, somewhere in the 23-20 range. Alvano missed a field goal after a penalty, or after the Lindemeyer fumble that kind of pushed them further out. That's a field goal that Nebraska has to make. But you had a turnover on the 31-yard line in the first on the first drive of the game for Nebraska. That's the snap that Sims dropped. That has to turn into points. The one where Alvano misses the field goal has to turn into points. They have so many opportunities where they just don't convert. And then on the other side, they turn it over in their own territory, so Colorado doesn't have very far to go. Nebraska set this thing up on a platter for Colorado, and the defense kept them in it for as long as they could. But again, the dam finally broke. You can't expect your defense to keep going out there time and time again and just not allow anything to go on. They did that in the first half. They gave themselves an opportunity to still be in it in the second half, and they could not convert. They could not execute. That is by far the most frustrating part about this loss.
Yeah, and I mean, you talk about, giving credit to Colorado. They took advantage of the opportunities they were given, and Nebraska didn't, I mean, there were a lot of times that Colorado was in a 2nd and 20-something, 3rd and 15, and they converted a lot of them, or at least it felt like, they were hurting themselves, but then they were bouncing back. And, Nebraska couldn't take advantage of, where they could capitalize.
And then you saw the fatigue kick in later in the game. Nebraska, who through about 7 quarters of this season had been incredibly sure tacklers, started to miss some of those, started to lose guys in coverage a little bit. And you could just see whether it's the altitude, whether it's the fatigue, whatever it is, start to get to these guys. And, it's hard to blame them too. Like
Right.
it's obviously you'd like to see the execution stay up through the entire game, but it's hard to blame Nebraska's defense for anything that's happened this season so far. I mean, yeah, Tommy Hill got burned, just totally lost a guy on a long pass down the sideline. That's about the only thing I look at and say, yeah, that's pretty bad.
Yeah. I think,
Which it's going to happen sometimes.
Yeah. And obviously it's still pretty early in the season, but I think this is probably one of the better offenses Nebraska's going to play. I mean, especially in terms of just the talent, the wide receivers they have, the running backs they have. So I'm pretty confident in them going forward too, that they'll be able to put together great games against, other Big Ten teams for the most part. And yeah, so
I would certainly hope so. I mean, you don't want to throw the towel in on the season. Obviously, this has
Right.
been just 2 games. I mean, it's a long year, but it also might be a long year, to tell you anything. Matt Rhule's trending on Twitter with Casey Thompson and Scott Frost. So probably not great. I'm not in a headspace to be able to click on that right now. So we'll see that maybe later. It is, you can see though, with the comments on the YouTube page, EJ or I don't know how to pronounce that, just says pain. Charles says that was sad. Imagine this is your team's post game. I know, Charles, I'm the one doing it. It hurts. It's it's not the most fun in the world to do. Last week I was with Andrew Rogers and I'm sitting there watching the game with him and I'm like, dear God, I don't want to do another post game after one of these losses, right? But there was enough there that I was like, hey, you clean up some of the turnovers, you feel okay. They still should have won the game. Like, okay, like there's positivity to take. You can still take some positivity away from the defense in this one, but my God, were there so many errors.
Yep. Yeah. And that defined the game, and it's something they got to clean up. It was a problem in week 1, and those are things that if they're a problem next 2 weeks, those games aren't going to be easy necessarily.
Well, and it came to define the game. What you hope is that it doesn't come to define the season, right? And listen, I'm not going to. I believe in Matt Rhule. I have been very open about that. I believe in what he has preached and what he's talked about all offseason, but the Jeff Sims thing is really difficult for me because one of the things that I care the most about in terms of what Matt Rhule has talked about in the offseason is accountability, holding people accountable, taking ownership. I don't know how you can continue to put Jeff Sims out there, call the plays that you've been calling, and have any credibility as a coach who holds people accountable. That's where I'm really interested to see where this goes, because otherwise it feels like it was just a lot of talk,
Right.
And that would be incredibly disappointing.
Yeah, and I think that's a balance, we're kind of trying to strike, because we know it's year 1 of a Matt Rhule program, and we know that we aren't really going to know where this goes until for a while. But what we've seen in week 1 against Minnesota, Gabe Ervin had 7 carries. There's a lot of things you really don't want to see, regardless of when the game is played. Anthony Grant had that fumble in the 4th quarter after they said he had been fumbling, and this week you have Jeff Sims not catching snaps. These are things that you should be able to get that right.
They're unforced errors, right?
And be able to respond correctly to that. I again, like we talked about, surprised that Sims stayed in the game even for, just the rest of the first half.
I thought they should have pulled him at halftime.
Yeah.
Like, I understand wanting to wait till halftime, maybe get Harburg with the offensive coaches, sit him down, kind of get him ready, prepped for the game plan. I don't know how because you're still in the game at that point. It's 13-0.
Yeah.
You're still in the game at that point. I don't know how you continue to march Jeff Sims out there when he has shown this is who he is, not just in Nebraska, but obviously the turnovers were a huge issue at Georgia Tech as well. And listen, I'm not saying, and we don't know the status of Jeff Sims' ankle, which took him out of the game in the 4th quarter. So this is all kind of assuming that he's healthy for next week. But I'm not even saying you have to bench him for the whole game, but just pull him for a series. Say, hey, you need to calm down. Like, have a conversation with him. Like, make sure he understands that there are consequences for continually doing the things that you do not allow your team to do. Because you don't allow Anthony Grant to fumble. He didn't see the field this week, okay? I get quarterback is a different position.
Right. Yeah.
Right? It's a different thing. And the gap between Anthony Grant and Gabe Ervin is a lot smaller, probably, than the gap between Jeff Sims and Heinrich Haarberg and Chubba Purdy. I get that. But there still has to be consequences for unacceptable play, right? Like if you're a football team and you're Matt Rhule, fumbling the ball the way he has been, making bad decisions with throwing. I mean, that interception on the sideline was a terrible decision and throw. That was not there. And so if you continually have a quarterback making bad decisions, maybe you can't pull him for the rest of the game. I understand that. You have to pull him for a series.
Yeah, and I think, moving forward, I figure that if healthy, you're going to start Jeff Sims. I think you look at, he probably has the upside to make those big plays like the 55-yard touchdown run that you might not get from your backups. But, I feel like it has to be consideration if he is making those mistakes in future games to, bench him, even if for a series, right? Because it didn't look like that was the case today. Obviously, they didn't pull him until he got hurt. So, that has to be something you're willing to do, even if you want to continue starting him.
Well, and, it kind of goes back to a thing that, and we've got a couple comments on YouTube we'll get to here in just a second, but it kind of goes back to the thing that Matt Rhule mentioned in, I believe it was one of those, A Look In or whatever their little docuseries is on YouTube, where he says, hey, I'm not changing who I am in the game week to win a game. It feels like that's what he's doing with Jeff Sims. It feels like he's going away from the things that he preaches and believes for a guy that he thinks gives him a better chance to win the game. And it obviously isn't winning him games. Right. And it kind of goes into Andy's question on Andy and Eric kind of make the same question. Andy asks, where do we go from here? Do you make a change at QB? And Eric says, when do we start to see them go young on offense like Rhule has done elsewhere during a rebuild? And here's the thing. I know Matt Rhule believed before the season that this didn't have to look like a 2-10 or a 1-11 or whatever they were at Temple and Baylor in his first year. And I hope to God that is not the case, because I'm on all of these post games. So I really hope that's not the case. But if you're going to lose anyway, lose following the things that you preach, right? Lose with integrity to the things that you believe are true. And you can't tell me that starting Sims is in line with the things he's been preaching since he got hired here. I don't believe that.
Yeah, or at least, keeping him
out there after continuing to start him after what we've seen, right? So, I know none of us want to say like, hey, we're just punting on the season to get guys ready. But that's the formula that has worked for Rhule in the past. And I think the talent that's here already is probably better than the talent was at Baylor because of the mass exodus after the Art Briles stuff. Certainly better than the talent was at Temple because it's freaking Temple. But I still think you probably, am I crazy to think that you win as many games starting the young guys and just kind of riding with the bumps as you are starting the veteran guys who you have to ride through the bumps with him anyway? Like, what's the upside here?
Yeah, if that's the case, yeah. And I don't know. I was critical of kind of the weapons at Minnesota. The wide receivers weren't getting open. Mm-hmm. They did that a lot better this week.
I thought the wide receivers,
Billy Kemp was good.
Billy Kemp was good.
He made some really great catches.
I thought Fedoni got open a little bit.
Yeah. He had the touchdown catch at the end. Obviously, his 2 catches came on the final drive. So make of that whatever you want to. But you'd like to see him get a little more involved. He, of course, his only 2 catches have come when the game was decided. It'd be great. Obviously, we saw his athleticism on that first catch. You'd like to see him more involved.
Absolutely.
If you can start to get the young wide receivers more involved as you play Northern Illinois, Louisiana Tech.
Yeah, it was like Malachi Coleman or Jalen Lloyd. Like some of those guys who we saw Jalen Lloyd last week on a reverse have to start getting some of those guys.
You got to figure something out to get this offense going because, it's looked really bad.
Yeah, Will says you have to prepare Haarberg to start over the next week. Ankle injury will help bridge it. Yeah, I think there's an argument to be made. And listen, I'm okay continuing to start Jeff Sims if he's healthy. Yep. If you're going to change the offense, right? focus a lot on that zone read, QB run heavy schemes, and allow your offensive line to kind of get into a rhythm, run blocking. I thought they looked pretty good running the ball at times.
Yeah.
Over the course of this game. I mean, they end up with 222 yards rushing on 41 carries. That's 5.4 yards a carry.
Pretty good. Yeah.
You'll take that every day. I mean, Gabe Ervin, 4.4 yards a carry. Jeff Sims, 6.7 yards a carry. Ramir Johnson, 6 yards a carry. Heinrich Harburg, 8.5 yards a carry. That's your offense. Knock it off with this other stuff. And listen, if Jeff Sims can't catch the ball to run that offense, then you put Heinrich Harburg in. Because guess what? 8.5 yards a carry. Yes, I get it was 2 carries.
Right.
But we've been told over and over and over again that Harburg's one of the best athletes on the team, right?
Yeah. That's
why he played H-back last week, is because they're like, hey, he's so athletic, we have to get him on the field. So if you're going to run this run-heavy offense, get him on the field. Let him run it. I'd be okay with that. And at least you're being consistent in your message of, hey, we don't allow us to beat ourselves. We don't allow players to continually make the same mistakes and not hold them accountable.
Yeah, I mean, I think, like you said, you got to look to continue to lean on the run. That's obviously what's doing best. Colorado kind of stopped it early and had some other big stops throughout the game, but obviously
you got to be patient.
226 yards. Yeah, they had some big runs. Ramir had one. Gabe Ervin had one. Jeff Sims obviously had the touchdown. So that's probably your best bet. You want to keep leaning on that. So, I mean, and that's a positive, especially, against Big Ten teams that probably aren't going to put up.
They're not going to be as explosive
points.
as Colorado is. I mean, Colorado genuinely has some really good playmakers, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Travis Hunter, really good playmaker. Weaver, really good playmaker. Dylan Edwards, really good playmaker. And obviously Shedeur Sanders, really talented quarterback, right? So you've got a few guys that are really talented for Colorado that are probably better than a lot of the playmakers in the Big Ten West, right? Like Iowa, pretty average playmakers. Minnesota, outside. I mean, honestly, Minnesota with Spanford and Jackson.
They have some good.
They have some pretty solid guys.
Their quarterback just wasn't
right. They didn't have Shedeur Sanders getting those guys the ball, right? So that was the difference. But listen, I'll take my chances with Cade McNamara. I'll take my chances against Illinois with Luke Altmaier and Isaiah Williams and all those guys. You look at the Big Ten West, they're not a ton of teams that scare you, right? Obviously, you have to get Northern Illinois, you have to get Louisiana Tech. But listen, if you self-sabotage the way Nebraska's been, those games aren't guaranteed either.
No.
Right? And so that's where I think if you're going to settle into kind of this new super run-heavy offense, I think these next 2 weeks are going to be critical to get your team comfortable doing that.
Yeah, you want to see the offense look good in these games, for sure.
I want to see them just not up.
Yeah, not have 4 turnovers,
that's
obviously.
It.
Yeah.
I don't even care if they look good. I want them to not look incompetent.
Yes.
That's a pretty low bar we're at here. Just don't constantly blow it for the defense.
Yeah.
Because the defense is going to keep you in it. Just wait for one of these guys. Because listen, Gabe Ervin had a 26-yard run. Jeff Sims had a 57-yard run. Ramir Johnson had a 44-yard run. And in 2 chances, Harburg had a 10-yard run. So you've got a bunch of guys that can break long runs, right? We feel confident in that. That maybe is the one thing we do feel confident in. So just give those guys a chance to break one of those runs and don't screw it up in the meantime.
Right.
It's a pretty simple plan.
Yeah.
Not like the band, but, a 90s emo kid. I think it's probably a little before your time, but
definitely. That's all right.
You didn't have to give me a definitely, Drake. That's a little harsh. Lucian, are you feeling me on the simple plan? Come on, man. There we go.
All right.
Checking back in on the YouTube stream. Will says, Harburg isn't quite the runner Sims is, but good enough athlete to run comparable offense. Totally agree. That's why, even if you're going to continue to start Jeff Sims, you're like, oh, can he take that many hits? Whatever. It's just put Harburg in if he gets hurt. If you're running a QB run-heavy offense or a run-heavy offense in general, you can deal with Harburg as your backup because you're not asking him to make a ton of throws.
Yeah.
That is crucial to me. Ronnie's hopping in saying, what happened to those predictions? Listen, I thought Nebraska was going to win this game. I'll be totally honest.
I chose Colorado, but I still didn't envision it being like this. Yeah.
No. And listen, if you had told me, hey, Colorado's going to get more than 30 points, be like, yeah, they're going to win the game.
Yeah.
Nebraska's not getting to 30 in this team, even though I don't think the Colorado defense was stunning. And, you look at those run numbers, they really weren't. It's just Nebraska kept giving it back to them.
Yep.
So, yeah, Ronnie, I'll eat that. Like it, I thought Nebraska was going to win. And I still maintain it should have been dramatically closer than it was.
Yeah.
Right? Like, that's a game that if you play clean football, you're definitely in it in the fourth quarter.
Right.
And they didn't play clean football, so they were definitely not in it in the fourth quarter. That's going to be the biggest. That's going to be the biggest differentiation moving forward. Is if Nebraska can clean that up, whether that's benching Sims, whether that's cleaning up the offensive play calls for him, whether that's just cleaning up some of the procedure penalties and stuff in general. Dylan says on YouTube, Sims has cost us 2 games already. Time to bench him. Listen, like I said, I'm okay if you bench him. I'm also okay if you just take the offense in a direction that limits his ability to make mistakes.
Yeah, I mean, 2 of those mistakes were
catching snaps. I get it. I get it. I don't know what you call.
Right.
I don't know what you call to just get him to catch the snap.
Yeah.
Hopefully that's a one-off, right? The interceptions I don't think are one-offs. The interceptions I think
are gonna be there. Like,
yeah,
it's gonna happen.
If you're asking him to throw the ball 20 times a game, he's gonna throw probably 2 picks a game. Like that's kind of what I've just come to accept at this point, which is horrifying.
Right.
but if you're going to do a run-heavy offense, yeah, he has to be able to catch the ball and catch the snaps. But I think that puts him in a position to be more successful. And listen, if that means he's running the ball 20, 25 times a game. So I said this earlier this week on the morning show with Damon. Like, you can't tell me that at 6'4", 220 pounds, Jeff Sims can't take as many hits as Eric Crouch took while he was running that offense, because Crouch got crushed. That dude is maybe 6 foot tall and like 190 pounds soaking wet. Like, I'm giving him a lot of credit at 190 pounds here, maybe with the pads on 190 pounds.
Right.
Like, I don't know. And listen, Eric Crouch is a Miller North guy. I'm a Miller North guy. Love Eric Crouch. This is not disparaging Eric Crouch at all. But you stand next to him, he is not a big guy. Jeff Sims is huge. You can't tell me Jeff Sims can't take as many hits as Eric Crouch did.
I mean, he's taken a lot of hits, and I don't know. I mean, the ankle is going to factor into that as well.
Yeah, that's kind of a random
maybe
one.
We'll see.
Yeah, we don't know what it is.
But we've had obviously quarterbacks, Adrian and KC, get hurt. Taking a lot of hits, and
so throw Harburg.
You want him available, but yeah, like you're going to run Sims because that's not like that's his biggest strength. You can't not do it.
Yeah,
right?
You can't avoid a guy's biggest strength and actively steer into their weaknesses because you're afraid of him getting hurt.
Right. Yeah.
Like, that's just bad football.
Absolutely.
Like, you can't do that.
Yeah.
And like, listen, he's not so good that you can't afford to get him hurt, especially if you're running this style of offense. Like, he's not Caleb Williams. I understand if you don't want Caleb Williams taking a ton of hits, right? Like, I get it. I understand if you're dealing with one of these super high-end quarterbacks, you're trying to preserve him a little bit. I totally understand that. Jeff Sims not that guy. Like, you kind of have to lean into his strengths, and if he gets hurt, he gets hurt, and then you put Heinrich Harburg in, and you run the exact same offense. Eric chimes in, how do we cure this program of the yips? Honestly, I don't even think it's the yips. I think it's holding people accountable to the standard that Matt Rhule says he has set within the program. Holding people accountable, it's not about the yips. It's about people being allowed to make mistakes and continue to play. It's about people being allowed to have mental errors or just make the wrong play and continue to be put out there. There becomes a point where it doesn't matter if the guy is more talented. You have to hold him accountable for his mistakes. And I think we're at that point.
Yeah.
With Jeff Sims. I certainly am.
Yeah. I like we've been talking about, mistakes. I don't think you can let a guy drop 2 snaps and not only drop them, but like one of them, he tried to pick up and run with it. And that's why that could have stayed Nebraska.
Yeah, just fall on the ball.
Yeah, that could have stayed Nebraska ball.
That's a mental error.
And he let it go. You can't have that happen. Even if you want to pull him for a drive or 2 drives, just get him right. Be like, can't do that. You know, do that. But I don't think you can just keep running him out there.
No, it's and like you said, it doesn't have to be you pull him forever. It doesn't have to be you bench him. Just get him out of the game. Let him get his head right. Let him slow down a little bit and just be like, hey, when you make mistakes, there's consequences, right? Like, think of it like a basketball player, right? A lot of times we think of football in this totally different sense of like, hey, you bench a guy, he never sees the field again, right? Especially with quarterbacks. think of it like a point guard, right? If your point guard's turning the ball over too much, just pull him out for a couple minutes, right? Let him settle down, be like, hey, what are you seeing out there? What's happening? Why is this happening? And then you put him back out there. Like, it doesn't have to be a permanent thing. Benching a guy does not have to be permanent. It can just be an adjustment you're making in the moment, and then you put him right back out there. I know these guys have like egos and confidence and whatever, but like, it's not like his confidence can be through the roof right now. Like, you can't have 7 turnovers in 2 games and be like, yeah, I'm confident as hell. Like, and if he is, like, he needs to see a psychologist because there's some delusion going on there, right? Like, that can't be a thing. And if he's not confident enough to overcome being pulled for a couple series, then maybe that's not the guy for you anyway. Like, he has to be able to handle coaching. Pulling a guy for a series or 2 when he's making constant mistakes is just part of coaching. It can be like a basketball player. It's not that big of a deal. It doesn't have to be this, oh no, they pulled the quarterback. I mean, like, you go back to Florida in the 90s, they pulled a quarterback every other series.
Yeah.
Sometimes they'd rotate plays.
I think last season, Casey got pulled for less. I think after it in one of those games, I think Purdy came in and had a turnover anyway.
But he got benched for a hell of a lot less than what we've seen.
Right, yeah.
And that's with that's with a guy that I didn't feel like held anybody accountable in Scott Frost. Like, just being totally honest,
right?
That's one of the reasons I didn't think he was going to be able to turn it around, is because I didn't think they had enough accountability in the program. And he pulled Casey Thompson for less. Speaking of Casey Thompson, one of the things that I was asked a lot on Twitter over the course of the game, because I was very active with my comments on Twitter during the game. If you follow Drake on Twitter, you're going to get a much more professional journalism view of what's happening during the game, and it's really good. If you follow me on Twitter, you're going to get an emotional roller coaster of whatever I'm feeling in that moment. So very different perspectives of how we approach Twitter during Nebraska games. But one of the things that I kept getting asked was, I wonder what the conversation with Casey Thompson and Matt Rhule was like that led him to leave. Because whatever flaws Casey Thompson had, I have a hard time believing Nebraska's not at least 1-1 if he's the quarterback this year.
Yeah.
Is that fair?
You're probably right. Yeah. I thought, I respected when obviously it seems that Rhule, chose Sims over Thompson, and that's fine. I respected it. I thought maybe Thompson was obviously a little more established as
certainly a better passer.
Better passer.
Justin's a better runner.
But obviously through 2 weeks, it looks really bad because
it looks horrible. I mean, it looks really, really bad.
Casey, I think it's fair to say that Casey would not have been this bad. Even if you want to say that they don't win these games anyway,
they certainly win Minnesota. Yeah. I'm not even willing to entertain that they
most
don't win.
Likely, yes.
I mean,
I would agree. Yeah.
Like, I can't even entertain that Casey Thompson doesn't win the Minnesota game. Probably a hell of a lot closer in this game as well. So, and listen, we're probably never going to know. We're not going to know what that conversation would happen. We're not going to know why Matt Rhule chose Jeff Sims over Casey Thompson. Is it because he had 2 years of eligibility? He thought he could build a little bit. I have no idea. What I do know is right now it looks pretty tough that Jeff Sims was their hand-picked, hand-chosen guy out of the portal, and it's gone about as badly as it possibly could.
Yeah. Yeah. And I am just really interested to see what they do at quarterback next week. Because
and it'll depend a lot on the health of Jeff Sims.
I've kind of been like assuming that'll be healthy enough to go, but we'll see.
Because they made it sound like during the game, and let's be honest, like Gus was not totally on his A game, so I'm not sure. I mean, I don't know how many times he can call Nate Borkacher Bo Ricker before he figures out that that's not his name, or Chuba Purdy. But like, they said during the game that it looked like Jeff Sims was ready to come back in. And so at that point, I assume, hey, this is not a serious long-term injury.
He had his helmet on it. I'm pretty sure he tried to come back in.
Sometimes
I can just be like, I don't know, adrenaline, but
yes. Yeah.
He's probably good, but we'll see. We'll see how that
I'm sure they'll do some testing.
Develops. Yeah.
I'm sure they'll do some treatment on it and see where he's at. And they probably did want to see Harburg get a look and see what it looked like.
At that point, no reason to put your injured quarterback back in
to see if he gets more injured
in a game that isn't close.
Yeah, that is over at that point. Really appreciate Drake joining me here. We've been going for about 40 minutes. Really appreciate everybody's comments on YouTube, on Twitter. Just a reminder, we'll be joining you after every single Nebraska game. You can come out here to Hurrdat Sports Bar and Grill. I'm probably going to watch all the games out here this season. Come hang out with me. Come say hi. I'm sure Drake will be out here a ton also. He's doing a bunch of these with me throughout the year. I know Andrew's joining me for some, and we'll sprinkle in, I think, a couple other people as well. But come on out. Let's have a good time. You can see me emotionally break down during the game and have have a emotional roller coaster the entire time. But wrapping things up, Nebraska loses 36-14 to Colorado, and I'm sure it's going to be hard watching national media this week and watching that Dion train
More Colorado talk.
really take off. But Drake, it was great hosting our first show together.
Yep.
I'm sure we'll have a lot more throughout the season. This has been the post-game spread presented by Hurrdat Sports. Also, thank you to our producer, Lucian, for handling things on that side of the board as well. Please join us next week. We'll be back.